I read The Oddfits by Tiffany Tsao. This is a fantasy book that it crosses over kind of with like weird fiction. It's a little bit YA. It's very kind of postmodern, I think. Difficult to put into a box, which makes sense when it calls itself The Oddfits. This is a reread for me. It's part of a larger series, but this is the only book that I've read. It's the first book, but the books are hard to find now because the rights have lapsed back to the author and she is trying to find a way to republish them with someone else and finish the trilogy. So the first two books were published, but now they're not available very widely or cheaply. Anyway, all of that to say that I'll only talk about the first book. So The Oddfits is about primarily Murgatroyd Floyd, the main character, who has a funny name. The whole book is very funny. It's kind of a satire, it's a comedy, but it's very dark at the same time. There's a real edge to the book. And Murgatroyd lives in Singapore. It's set in the modern day. And his parents named him Murgatroyd because they kind of hate him. His parents are kind of the antagonists in the book, but really everyone in the book who would usually be an ally is Murgatroyd's enemy. So like his parents, his boss, who he is like the boss's pet, his best friend, all of those people are really enemies to Murgatroyd. They treat him the opposite of whatever that relationship would normally be, which is kind of what the book is all about. Like everything about the book is inside out. The dynamics of those relationships are the opposite of how they should be. A lot of the pacing of the plot, the construction of the story is inside out. And then that is even exemplified to the point of what the Oddfits are capable of doing to the world itself and how they experience the world in an inside out kind of way. So Murgatroyd, by the nature of his very being, we find out in the full course of the story, is antagonistic to the normal experience of everyone around him. He makes everyone feel uncomfortable, even disgusted and sick just by being himself. He makes people bored. There's just a natural turning away from him in every way because he is an oddfit. And so oddfits are people who are born in the world just randomly. There doesn't seem to be any reason why this happens to people who are able to access some kind of extra dimensionality to the universe, is how it seems to me. So there's this really probably like the most striking scene in the book for me about halfway through where Murgatroyd meets this character named Anne, and she demonstrates to him what an oddfit is capable of doing. She's trying to like recruit him into the oddfit culture. And they're in a park. It's full of people. There's hundreds of people in this park. And it's just kind of like bustling on a weekend day. And it's, beautiful outside. So people are picnicking. They're going for walks and whatever. And Anne kind of unfolds the universe around them such that the distances between people vastly expands to the point where it seems like they're in a almost abandoned space. But at the same time, when Murgatroyd like looks up into the sky, he can see people sitting upside down over his head on patches of grass and whatnot. And so this is kind of like, if you've ever seen, kind of psychedelic depictions of extra geometry or something like the, Doctor Strange movie or something like that, where the universe unfolds in ways that don't make sense or seem dreamlike. That seems to be what Oddfits have access to naturally. And when the Oddfits are in what they call the more known universe, or the more known world is what they say. So that feels like home to them. So there's like the known world, which is what we live in, and then the more known world, which I love that naming convention, because it's, this is the kind of unexplored country is what it would feel like, the place that makes every place into a new place, but the name of it says that it's like more of a home than the quote unquote normal world, which beautifully, I think, illustrates the inversion of everything that you would typically get in this genre. Like, it's very self-conscious and canny, I think, of all kinds of tropes, and is deliberately kind of turning them on their head. It reminds me in some ways of Alice in Wonderland. Like, it's very playful in its tone. So the structure of the book itself is represented within the book in that way. And it's as if the fantasy world is kind of a build out of the concept of inverting storytelling, if you will. And so Murgatroyd is like a terrible protagonist for that reason. And what I mean by that is a typical protagonist that you would have in storytelling, you want to have them with a good set of capabilities, because that allows for interesting and dramatic scenarios to unfold, right? So you've got somebody who speaks several languages and is good at picking locks and picking pockets and things like that. Well, you can throw that character into a lot of different scenarios and they'll have the capability to get in and out of trouble and create quite an interesting story. Or someone, who's like a rocket scientist, but they also secretly have psychic powers. There's a lot of things that character can do too, right? Murgatroyd is bad at everything. He's not a good student. He's very socially inept. He's not charismatic. He just doesn't have any talents, which makes him lovable. It makes him very vulnerable. His happy and loving attitude, his kind of acceptance, and also soft hurt over all of the disappointing things in life make me care about him. But there's nothing that he's capable of that induces drama. And I think a lot of the tension that the book needs to draw the reader through the story comes through its exceptional construction. Like, just the weirdness of the book keeps you turning the pages because you're like, what is even happening? Like, I don't understand. The beginning of the book is really confusing because it's so inverted from how you would typically see any book start. So what I mean by that is you have these parents who have a baby, and it's clear that they really enjoy making the baby unhappy and whenever the baby cries. So I'm laughing. It's terrible. They're terrible people. Their marriage is kind of ruined by having a baby, which is like such an interesting choice because it's so often depicted as the opposite, right? A baby is kind of the incarnation of a couple's love in a story. It's a kind of crown to the glory of their marriage, typically. And so often in YA type books, you'll have parents who are like loving, but then are somehow like removed from the main character. And so that love, like think of Harry Potter or something like that. His mother and father's love stays with him as a bedrock to his identity, but also like the key to his vulnerability. And the way that, you can tap into the character and be like, his uncle and aunt are terrible to him in ways that are very similar to this. And I think that's intentional. I think Tsao is like self-consciously kind of referencing some Harry Potter themes. But as gleeful as the aunt and uncle are in their treatment of Harry, they're a little bit more like psychopathic in their entire approach to the rest of society. They are just depraved, selfish people. But Murgatroyd's parents are only cruel to him, and they do it in order to cope with the effect, the reality warping effect that he is having on them. And it also, like I said, it ruined their marriage. And so they kind of bond over the way that they treat or mistreat their son, which is weird, but in a warped way keeps their love alive and it keeps their family intact. And it actually gave Murgatroyd like a home to grow up in. As twisted and weird as the book is, there is like a barely functioning nuclear family at the core of the story in a bizarre way. And in a sense, I think what's really interesting in this book is how Tsao takes out all of the sentimentality from relationships and all of the tenderness and niceness that exists typically in relationships and replaces it with a kind of mischievous malice or a selfishness that it throws something into relief for me. It's a lot of the way that science fiction and fantasy operates anyway, but it typically doesn't deal with personal relationships in this way. So like, for example, you'll have like take something classic like Jules Verne's Time Machine, right? So the time machine in that story removes the progression of time as we normally experience it from the character's experience in the story. So instead of, days, months, weeks, years, all that piling up on the character, they are able to move through centuries and millennia instantaneously. And so their relationship to cause and effect and to time itself is like very, very different from ours, which unglues our sensibilities about what time is and gets us to start thinking about history and consequence and our place in time in a completely different way. And so I think in the same way, Tsao taking out the sentimentality and affection from relationships like a parent-child relationship, like a best friend relationship, starts to reveal something that's underneath those nice dynamics that usually characterize them, that there's a kind of selfish undercurrent to all of those relationships. And while they can be like mutually beneficial and can feed our spirit in different ways, there is something kind of selfish to them as well, or there can be. Like, I'm not talking about the kind of calculated relationship where it's, one person marries another to get at their money or something like that. But that any relationship at all has a calculus somewhere in it that has to do with desire and pleasure. And we usually cover that up with ideas of what you are giving to the other person. And we don't talk about what you get from that person so much. And so I think the story reveals that underbelly and really like elevates that to the forefront. There's no relationship that Murgatroyd has with anybody except maybe Anne, which is like a normal, affectionate, loving relationship. And even his friendship with Anne is only in the beginning stages and based on a shared identity and not like a deep knowing of each other. So Murgatroyd goes to school in Singapore. His parents are both from England, but they live in Singapore because of their jobs, and that's how they met and got together and got married and all that stuff. So he doesn't fit in that way. He is a little white boy in the Singapore public school system, and his parents deliberately dress him up like a girl and send him to school or give him terrible haircuts or weird lunches, also that he can like be embarrassed at school to like humiliate him. And like his terrible, unpronounceable, unspellable name, Murgatroyd Floyd. And then they rename him like Suck Fu or something like that to give him a quote unquote Singapore name, which is just another like terrible name to get made fun of. And then they to his face, they always treat him with love and understanding and like, oh my goodness, you were bullied today. That's so terrible. You don't deserve that. Let me comfort you. But then behind his back, they laugh at him and bond over the terrible things that they help to happen, like by dressing him up in a dress, for example, and things like that. And so all of that kind of stuff like continues for Murgatroyd's entire school career. But he also like makes a best friend from the kids teasing him. One of the most popular boys who's like handsome and smart and charismatic sticks up for him and then becomes friends with him purely out of a sense of kind of pity and like in the sense of like superiority in a kind of condescending way, that he is safely better than this guy. This guy will never be a threat to him, right? Murgatroyd is never going to be as good looking, charismatic, smart as he is. And so he can have him as kind of like a little sidekick and take care of him. And it makes him look that much more magnanimous and makes him feel good about himself, basically. And so again, you see how the relationship, is calibrated in a way to like what gives the advantage to his friend and not the kind of typical reciprocal relationship that would be about affection. She's revealing that calculus under things. And then we kind of jump to, I'm skipping over some. So there's a really important thing that happens when he's a kid, that he goes to this ice cream shop. And this is like the first encounter with genuine pleasure that he has. And the ice cream shop owner is an Oddfit who was part of this thing called the Quest, but now he is retired from it. And he instantly recognizes that Murgatroyd is an Oddfit and that he needs to be recruited out of the known world, because the world itself has a kind of like consciousness or understanding, and it views the Oddfits as a kind of threat or irritant to its existence. And so when the Oddfits come into the known world and try to exist in regular three-dimensional space, the world resists them and pushes back against them in all kinds of ways. And it can be literally dangerous. It can be like making people want to murder the Oddfit to get rid of them. And so like the whole thing feels like a metaphor for all kinds of ways of not fitting into society, which I think literally every person in the world can relate to not fitting in. Like none of us actually really fit in to the world. But to me, when I read it, I see like a metaphor for autism, the way that he talks to people and they just instantly get bored and tune out, the way that he's socially awkward, he's too quiet, he talks too much when he shouldn't, he's quiet when he should be talking, things like that. Like he's really bad at social cues. And there's just kind of like an uncomfortableness that he brings up to people wherever he goes. But he gets along with this ice cream seller because the guy is also, the same kind of, he's an Oddfit. And he writes a letter to his society notifying them that the boy is an Oddfit. And they're like, well, start him on the quest, get him going. And he's like, not yet, not yet, which is outside of the normal way of doing things, apparently. And he takes his time and slowly reveals that there's something that he needs to talk to him about. And when he realizes how Murgatroyd's parents are mistreating him, he feels like it's time to get him out of the known world. And he starts to write a letter to notify the other Oddfits that this needs to happen like immediately. They need to get a hold of him because he's not safe. But while he's writing the letter, he actually passes away of like, it seems like natural causes. And so Murgatroyd is never recruited into the Oddfit quest, and instead he grows up into an adult. And so there's a time jump where we see like he's 25 years old now. He's a waiter in a restaurant. He's actually the best waiter in the restaurant, and he's kind of the pet of the restaurant owner, who is this maven entrepreneur who has developed several restaurants around high concept dining for the elite and rich. And so her concept with the restaurant that she has with Murgatroyd is that he is a European waiter, and he can the Singaporeans can order him around, which is a kind of power fantasy. And he is so socially inept that he misreads the situation. Like, he doesn't understand the way that he's being humiliated and used and the kind of racism that's happening to him. He's just like really good at his job, and he's great at it, and he loves doing it. And so there's, the ironic nature of all of his relationships, the way that we understand what's going on, but Murgatroyd doesn't, I think contributes to like the sense of vulnerability to the character, but also is fuel for the humor, obviously. And it is part of like the weirdness in the story that just makes you keep turning pages, because you just want to see like what else does he not get. And again, it shows how like he's totally inept. Like, in terms of the protagonist, he's just built the opposite of how you usually are supposed to build a main character. So he's like a waiter who's bad at reading the needs of his tables. And that's what makes him really, really great at waiting on the tables, actually, because of the nature of the restaurant. But at this point, the Oddfits realize that there's been an oversight and that they need to catch up with him and get him pulled out of the known world. And so they track him down and talk to him, and they half expect him to have, quote unquote, adapted to the normal world, which is something that seems to be possible for Oddfits to do. So if they don't leave the known world and go to the more known world, then they lose whatever it is that makes them an Oddfit over time, and they can't access that other world anymore, and they just kind of assimilate into what they call the same fits. So the majority of people, the quote unquote normal people. And so he meets this woman, Anne, who comes into the restaurant and sits in his section. She has an eye patch. She's dressed in very weird, outlandish ways, but she doesn't care how people stare at her and stuff. And this is part of like, what the Oddfits are. They are a little bit iconoclastic, very weird, stick out. And she tells him what's up, like, come talk to me. And then she leaves the restaurant. And the rest of the book, like, he goes to the park, and that's the thing that I talked about before, where she unfolds the world for him. And the rest of the book is a struggle of, he immediately wants to join the quest and leave to the more known world, but his parents and best friend and boss do everything that they can to resist him leaving, because their relationships with him are so advantageous for themselves. So like, out of a sense of selfishness, they don't want to do this. They don't want him to do this thing that's good for him, and they want to hold him back from what's best for him, showing, like demonstrating how the relationship has no care in it, no affection, actually, that it's all about what serves them the best and not what's best for Murgatroyd. And so his parents can't have him leave because that would, force them to confront the ways in which their marriage is ruined. His best friend doesn't want him to leave because he feels like if anyone should be the chosen one who goes on a quest, it should be him, because he's the, most charismatic, smartest, coolest guy in the world, basically. And then his boss doesn't want him to leave because it would ruin the entire concept of the restaurant and no one can take his place and her success would collapse. But Anne and the other Oddfits that we meet are a little bit ambivalent about whether or not he will join. They say that there's a quest. It's not clear what the quest entails. Maybe that's expounded upon in the following book. I've never read that book, so I don't know. But this book doesn't really care about that. It's just, holding out that there is this escape from this world that's, built in such an ironic way. And the only thing that Murgatroyd knows, because he doesn't understand the dark edge to all of his relationships, is the feeling that he has in the more known world and how it feels right. And so he visits there a few other times. And the more he visits there, whenever he comes back to the known world, we kind of see from the perspective of the world itself that it becomes aware of Murgatroyd and doesn't like what he is becoming and has allowed him to be in the world without assimilating. But now he has become a threat. And so starts to send people out to kill him. And so there's this guy who works at the restaurant he's called the Duck Assassin, which is so great. And part of the shtick of the restaurant is that they, how you go to like a seafood place and they'll like kill the fish on the table to show you how fresh it is and things like that. This guy, he comes out with a duck and he'll kill the duck in front of you and then he'll go back and cook the duck, which is wild. It's just weird and gross. But this guy stalks Murgatroyd and is out to kill him, basically, because the world wants him gone. And so the tension ratchets up in the book. Is he going to make it out or not? And then also, as he keeps going to the more known world, his perceptions of the known world change. And he starts to understand the ways in which he's being mistreated. And especially the relationship with his parents changes, where they lie to him and tell him that he can't go because his father has breast cancer and he's going to die and they need him to stay and take care of him. And they try to like bribe him by giving him a bed for the first time in his life and allowing him to take hot showers and all of these things. Is so terrible, but it's really funny. And he figures out that his dad does not have breast cancer and that his parents hate him, and he confronts them about it, and they actually tell him the truth and come clean with him. And it's a really moving part of the book, as absurd as it is and weird as it is. They do tell him the truth that their marriage as it is relies on him bonding over his suffering. And he chooses to leave them and successfully makes it out to the more known world and joins up with Anne. And there's a promise of like more adventures and a greater degree of becoming in the following stories. And so in a way, the story is foreclosed at the point at which the irony collapses. And so as the world opens up, as he peels back the construction of the world and sees the truth of it in exactly the same way that Anne, pulled apart the dimensions of the world and showed him the more known world, as his own world becomes more known, that is when the story has to end and a new story has to be constructed, because there's no more tension that can exist in the story at this point. And so the only thing that can happen for Murgatroyd is his character is going to have to evolve, or the focus is going to have to move to a different character. But I just appreciate the high degree of irony and the interesting way that the relationships are calibrated. It's such a unique, weird book. And it's like, it's funny, but it's sinister and dark. It's not going to be for everyone, but I think of it often. I've read it a couple of times, and there's always interesting things that I notice every time I come back to it. So it's a rewarding, weird book. Hopefully the series can find a publishing home and Tiffany Tsao can finish the story. I would love to read the other books.